The town of Ridgefield Springs had always slept quietly beneath the amber glow of its streetlights. Nights there carried the scent of pine and the hum of crickets, and for Officer Daniel Cooper, it was the kind of silence that had once felt like home. But lately, silence only reminded him of what was gone. His wife, Elena, had passed away 3 winters ago, and though Daniel still kept her picture by the coffee pot, the house had grown heavier with each sunrise. That night, the dispatcher's voice cut through the radio. Unit 12, possible abandonment case on Maple Avenue. 6 minors involved. Daniel rubbed his eyes, muttered a weary "copy that," and turned his cruiser toward the address. He expected another late-night domestic report, until he saw the porch light flickering weakly against the dark. Inside the small, weather-beaten house, the air was stale with neglect. Empty cereal boxes, broken toys, and the faint sound of whimpering filled the room. On the worn-out couch huddled 6 little girls, all with dark skin, tight curls, and wide, frightened eyes. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10. A social worker was already there, her voice steady but eyes soft with sorrow. "They lost both parents in an accident 2 days ago," she whispered. "No relatives have come forward. They'll be separated first thing tomorrow." The words struck Daniel like a blow. The thought of those sisters, split into different homes, losing not only their parents but each other, tightened his chest. The youngest clung to a teddy bear missing one eye, staring up at him as if searching for safety. Something deep inside him shifted. It wasn't logic. It wasn't reason. It was instinct, the kind of instinct that had once made him promise Elena he'd build a family filled with love, no matter what shape it took. He crouched down, his badge glinting in the lamplight. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked softly. The girl whispered, "Nia." Her voice trembled. "Are they gonna take us away?" Daniel hesitated. He didn't know the answer. Not yet. That night, sleep didn't come. He sat at his kitchen table until dawn, the case file open in front of him. The girls' names were scribbled on the page. Nia, Amari, Layla, Harper, Zoe, and Kiera. 6 lives dangling on a bureaucratic thread. He could almost hear Elena's voice in his head. "You don't have to save everyone, Danny." But what if, this time, he did? By sunrise, he had made his decision. He would fight for them, not as an officer, but as a father. The next morning, the foster agency office was filled with chatter and stale coffee, the air thick with routine paperwork. When Daniel walked in and announced he wanted to apply to adopt all 6 girls together, the room fell silent. The woman behind the desk blinked twice before stammering, "All 6? Sir, that's unprecedented." "I know," he said simply, "but families belong together." The process was a battle of questions, inspections, and raised eyebrows. "You're single," one case manager reminded him, "and white. These girls will face challenges you can't understand." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then I'll learn. I'll show up. Every day." Weeks turned into months, filled with home visits, interviews, and psychological evaluations. The community whispered behind his back. Some called him a fool, others worse. But each evening, he'd visit the girls at the temporary group home, bringing books, coloring pencils, and laughter. Slowly, fear began to fade from their eyes. When the adoption papers were finally approved, the judge looked at Daniel over her glasses and said quietly, "Mr. Cooper, do you understand the magnitude of this decision?" He nodded, voice steady. "I do, ma'am. Love doesn't have a color, it has a commitment." That evening, as the girls stepped into their new home for the first time, Daniel watched them run through the hallway, their laughter echoing against the walls that had long been too quiet. Nia paused by a framed photo of Elena. "Is that your wife?" she asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "That's the woman who taught me what love really means." Nia reached up and placed her small hand over the frame. "Then I think she'd be proud of you." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat thick with emotion. For the first time in years, the silence inside the house felt peaceful, not empty. Outside, dawn painted the sky in soft gold, and the world seemed to breathe again. The journey ahead would not be easy, he knew that much. But for the first time since losing Elena, Daniel Cooper felt alive. Because sometimes, family isn't found by blood. It's built, moment by moment, out of courage, faith, and love that dares to cross every line the world draws. The first few months in the Cooper household were a blur of adjustment. Tiny victories tangled with chaos. Breakfasts often ended in spilled milk and mismatched socks. Homework time stretched into late evenings filled with laughter, tears, and crayons scattered across the table. Daniel had expected sleepless nights. What he hadn't expected was how deeply the sound of 6 small voices would fill the hollow spaces of his heart. But not everyone in Ridgefield Springs shared his joy. Some neighbors offered polite smiles that never reached their eyes. Others whispered in grocery aisles, their voices sharp with judgment. "It's not right," one woman muttered as Daniel passed. "Those kids deserve to be with their own kind." First, Daniel pretended not to hear. He focused on learning about hair care, cultural heritage, the history that shaped the world his daughters would grow up in. He bought children's books about Black heroes, hung posters of Maya Angelou and Jackie Robinson, and took the girls every Sunday to Grace Baptist Church, the only Black congregation in town. The stares when he first walked in were cautious, questioning. But the pastor, Reverend Milton, welcomed him with a firm handshake and a nod of understanding. "It's not about where they come from, son," the Reverend said after service. "It's about what kind of man you choose to be while raising them." Daniel took that to heart. Still, even love met its limits when faced with exhaustion. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, he came home to find crayons on the walls, spaghetti on the floor, and 6 girls shouting at once. For a moment, the weight of responsibility pressed so heavily on him that he had to step outside. He stood on the porch, breathing in the cold air, feeling both gratitude and despair. How could one man possibly be enough? The next day, help came from an unexpected place. Marla Jenkins, a retired teacher from the church, knocked on his door with a basket of muffins. "You're drowning, aren't you?" she said, eyes kind but honest. "Let me teach you how to braid." Under her patient instruction, Daniel spent hours learning how to part, moisturize, and twist hair properly. His first attempts were disastrous, crooked and frizzy, but the girls' laughter turned failure into something beautiful. "Daddy, that one looks like a pretzel." Kiara giggled. Daniel chuckled. "Then it's a special edition braid." As the weeks passed, their home began to find rhythm. Nia, the eldest, became the responsible one, helping pack lunches and calm her sisters when Daniel was late from patrol. Harper showed a love for painting, her bedroom walls a kaleidoscope of color. Amari was the dreamer, often found reading under blankets long past bedtime. Layla had a temper, but also the fiercest heart. Zoe was quiet, always watching and writing in her small notebook. And little Kiara, she was the joy that kept them all smiling. One evening, Nia came home from school in tears. A classmate had called her a slur Daniel couldn't bring himself to repeat. His hands clenched as he listened, anger simmering beneath his calm. But when he looked into Nia's eyes, hurt, not hate, he realized his role wasn't vengeance, but guidance. "You can't control what people say," he told her gently, "but you can choose who you become because of it." She sniffled. "But it's not fair." "I know," he said. "The world won't always be fair, sweetheart. But love, that's how we fight back." That night, Daniel sat alone by the fireplace, staring at the embers. He thought about how easily cruelty could scar innocence, and how much work it took to heal it. He promised himself he'd teach them not just to survive the world's ignorance, but to rise above it. Months rolled into years. Birthdays came with homemade cakes and lopsided candles. Summers meant picnics by the lake and evenings filled with music. Slowly, the whispers around town faded, replaced by nods of quiet respect. People began to see not a man defying norms, but a father building something rare, a home built on love strong enough to silence prejudice. Late one night, as he tucked Kiara into bed, she yawned and murmured, "Daddy, do you ever get tired of loving us?" Daniel smiled, brushing a curl from her forehead. Never, sweetheart. Love's the one thing that gives me strength. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the window. Inside, the house glowed warm, filled with laughter and belonging. A fragile, precious piece Daniel vowed never to let go of. By the time the Coopers had spent nearly a decade together, the house on Elm Street had transformed from a patchwork of chaos into something alive with routine and rhythm. But growing up always brought change, and with it, tension. The girls were no longer small children who saw Daniel as a superhero. They were young women discovering who they were, and the world wasn't always kind to girls who didn't fit its narrow expectations. The trouble began with Tiana, now 15, the athlete of the family. Her natural strength made her a local basketball star, but her confidence often clashed with Daniel's quiet discipline. One evening, after practice, she stormed into the kitchen, slamming her duffel bag on the counter. "You don't get it," she shouted. "You don't know what it's like to be me. They look at me different at school. They talk behind my back. And when I tell them you're my dad, they laugh." Her voice cracked. Daniel froze, unsure whether to reach for her or give her space. The air thickened with hurt. "I know I can't understand everything you face," he said finally. "But I'm here. Always." Tiana crossed her arms, her eyes wet but defiant. "You can't fix this with love, Dad. You can't braid away the fact that I'll never fit in your world." The words cut deeper than she knew. That night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He'd built a home that survived gossip and scorn, but how could he mend the fracture within it? The following Sunday, he took Tiana to Atlanta, hours away from Ridgefield, to meet Coach Marissa Cole, a former pro athlete and mentor from the Black community. The drive was long, filled with silence broken only by the hum of the highway. When they arrived, Marissa greeted Tiana with warmth and fierce pride. "You've got talent, girl," she said after watching her shoot hoops. "But you're carrying anger heavier than that ball. You can't let other people define your worth." That night, over dinner, Daniel listened as Marissa and Tiana talked about culture, identity, and belonging. For the first time, he didn't try to offer answers. He just listened. When they drove home under a sky full of stars, Tiana rested her head against the window. "Thanks," she murmured quietly, "for not trying to fix everything." Daniel smiled faintly. Sometimes love just means showing up, even when we don't have the answers. Meanwhile, the other girls were finding their paths. Amari, the eldest, had become a social worker's assistant, drawn to help children like she once was. Zoe wrote short stories for her school newspaper, her words sharp and empathetic. Layla, always passionate, led her high school's debate club and challenged every unjust rule. Harper painted murals across town, vivid colors that turned gray walls into hope. Kiera, now 12, still followed everyone around, sketchbook in hand, her laughter lighting up even the hardest days. But change came again, quietly this time. Daniel began coughing more often, his once steady hands trembling as he filled out police reports. The doctor called it fatigue. Then later, something worse. The word cancer arrived like a cold wind, stealing the warmth from every corner of their lives. He tried to hide it at first, but Nia noticed. "Dad," she whispered one night, "you're getting thinner." He forced a smile. "Just tired, sweetheart." But she wasn't fooled. None of them were. The girls took turns helping him, Amari managing appointments, Harper cooking dinners, Tiana driving him to treatment. Yet the strongest bond formed not through pity, but shared resilience. Daniel, who had once carried all 6 of them, was now carried by their love. One morning, while he sat on the porch watching the sunrise, Zoe handed him a notebook filled with their memories. Letters, drawings, even a lock of hair from their first day together. On the cover, she'd written, "For the man who chose us." Daniel's eyes blurred. "I didn't save you," he said softly. "You all saved me." For a brief moment, Ridgefield Springs stood still. The man who had defied the town's prejudice now sat surrounded by 6 strong young women, each a reflection of his courage and compassion. Their world was not perfect, never would be, but love had done what nothing else could. It had rewritten the meaning of family. Winter came early that year, wrapping Ridgefield Springs in a hush of snow and soft gray skies. Daniel's illness had worsened, the once strong officer now moving slower, breath shorter. The girls tried to keep the house bright, fire crackling, laughter echoing. But beneath the warmth lingered fear. Love had given them strength, but none of them knew how to prepare for losing the man who had built their world. One morning, Daniel gathered them around the kitchen table. He looked frail in his flannel shirt, his once broad shoulders smaller, yet his eyes still carried that steady calm that had guided them since childhood. "I'm not leaving you," he said gently. "Just slowing down. Promise me you'll keep moving forward." Tiana clenched her fists. "We're not talking about this." "We have to," Amari whispered, placing a hand on her sister's arm. "He's trying to help us be ready." The words shattered the fragile quiet. Kiara ran upstairs in tears, and for the first time, Daniel felt truly powerless. He'd once known how to fix scraped knees and school troubles. But how do you comfort children who fear the silence after you're gone? That night, the older girls sat together in the living room, the fire casting flickering shadows. Amari spoke first. "He gave up everything for us. The least we can do is give him peace." Zoe nodded. "We can do more than that. We can make sure his love doesn't end with us." And so they began to plan. Quietly, secretly, with determination burning brighter than grief. Amari reached out to contacts in social services, asking how to support foster youth. Layla contacted city officials to learn about funding options. Harper designed a logo. Zoe started writing their story. Even Tiana, though still wrestling with her emotions, joined in, helping with community outreach. When Daniel's next hospital stay came, they transformed his room into something beautiful, walls decorated with their drawings, photographs, and one large banner. "You taught us how to love." The nurses whispered about them, calling them the Miracle Daughters. Daniel just smiled weakly whenever one entered the room. "No miracle," he'd say. "Just family." Days blurred into weeks. Treatments came and went, some helping, some not. Yet every morning at least one of his girls was there, reading to him, holding his hand, or simply sitting in silence. Their devotion became his strength. One evening, Tiana returned from the basketball court, sweat-streaked and quiet. She sat by his bed, holding his hand tightly. "I used to think you didn't understand me," she said softly. "But now I know you didn't have to. You just loved me anyway." Daniel squeezed her hand, his voice a whisper. "That's all love ever asks, honey. To stay, even when you don't understand." In spring, his health began to stabilize, a fragile peace that felt almost like grace. He returned home, thinner but alive, his spirit rekindled by the energy of his daughters. It was then that they revealed their secret project. They took him to the town's old community center, newly painted and filled with people. Neighbors, church members, social workers, children. A banner hung from the ceiling, the Daniel Cooper Foundation for Family and Unity. "This is your legacy," Amari said, her voice trembling. "We'll help families like ours stay together. We'll make sure no child has to face the world alone." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Tears streamed down his face. He looked at each of them. 6 daughters once lost to the world, now found in love, and whispered, "You turned my home into a movement." The crowd applauded, the sound like thunder rolling through the hall. Daniel stood, frail but proud, and addressed them all. "I thought I was rescuing 6 children," he said, "but they were the ones who rescued me. From loneliness, from bitterness, from forgetting what love can do." That night, when they returned home, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. The girls huddled around him on the porch, the glow of Christmas lights reflecting in their eyes. "Daddy," Kiara said sleepily, "what if love really does last forever?" Daniel smiled faintly, pulling her close. "It does," he whispered, "because it keeps finding new hearts to live in." Years drifted forward like slow-moving clouds. Ridgefield Springs changed, new stores opened, old faces faded. but the Cooper home remained a constant beacon on Elm Street. Daniel, though older and slower now, found peace in the rhythm of life he had built. The girls, once children clinging to his hands, had all become women carving paths of their own. Amari became director of a community outreach program, fighting tirelessly to keep foster families together. Zoe's words had found a larger stage. Her essays on race, love, and belonging appeared in national magazines. Tiana, having retired from professional basketball after an injury, coached local girls who reminded her of herself. Bold, angry, beautiful. Layla entered politics, the youngest councilwoman in town history. Harper painted murals that stretched across city blocks, and Kiera, now in college, studied art therapy to help children express what words could not. Daniel often watched them gather in his backyard on Sunday afternoons, laughter mixing with the sizzle of the grill. They teased, argued, and reminisced, but no matter how far their lives had carried them, they always came home. One summer evening, as fireflies blinked across the yard, Layla pulled out a small velvet box and handed it to him. "We want you to see something," she said. Inside was a gold pin engraved with the foundation's new name, the Cooper House for Love and Learning. Their project had grown into a full-fledged network, mentorship programs, educational grants, adoption support. Hundreds of families had been helped. Daniel's hands trembled as he held the pin. "I never dreamed of this," he said softly. Amari smiled. "You didn't have to. You lived it." The next morning, Daniel sat on his porch with his coffee, sunlight glinting off the pin. He thought about the first night he had met them. 6 scared little girls staring up from that worn-out couch. Life had taken them all on a journey through pain, confusion, and healing. And through it all, they had chosen love again and again. That fall, Tiana and her wife Maya announced they were expecting their first child. The news spread through the family like wildfire. Squeals, tears, laughter. When the baby girl arrived, they named her Elena Grace, after Daniel's late wife. The circle had closed, life continuing where loss once began. Daniel met the baby at the hospital, his wrinkled hands trembling as he cradled her. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "You've already got more love waiting for you than you'll ever know." As months passed, he spent his days surrounded by family and memories. The walls of the house were covered with photos, each one a chapter in a story that defied fear, bias, and loneliness. But even joy carried a shadow. One winter morning, while shoveling snow, Daniel felt a sharp pain in his chest. The world tilted, the white blur fading to darkness. When he woke in the hospital, the girls were all there, their faces pale with worry. He smiled faintly. "Don't look so sad. I'm not done yet." Amari held his hand, her voice breaking. "Promise us you'll fight." He nodded. "Always. But remember, fighting doesn't always mean winning. Sometimes it means leaving something worth continuing." Days later, Zoe visited alone. She placed a stack of papers beside his bed. A manuscript. "It's your story, Dad. I finished it for you." Daniel's eyes welled with tears as he read the title, Love Without Borders. Each chapter told their family's story, not as tragedy or miracle, but as truth. "People need to see this," she said. "They need to believe that love can rewrite what the world tells them is impossible." Daniel looked at her, pride and peace reflected in his gaze. "Then promise me you'll share it. All of it. I promise." That night, as the hospital lights dimmed, Daniel watched snow drift past the window. He thought of Elena's laugh, of 6 little girls clinging to him on that first night, of the countless moments that had built a lifetime. He had given them a home, but they had given him something far greater. Love had carried them through everything. Loss, judgment, illness, time. And now, even as his body grew weaker, he knew love would carry them beyond him, too. Spring came softly to Ridgefield Springs, the air scented with lilacs and new beginnings. The Cooper home, once filled with noise and small footsteps, now held the quiet rhythm of a legacy that refused to fade. Daniel had grown frail, his hair completely white, his steps slow and careful. Yet his eyes, still the color of the open sky, remained as alive as ever. The girls visited often, each taking turns to stay with him. The town that once whispered behind his back now greeted him with kindness. The local paper had run a story titled, "The Man Who Redefined Family," and his foundation had become a symbol of compassion throughout the state. Daniel never sought recognition, but when strangers approached to thank him, he always said the same thing: "I just did what love told me to do." One Sunday afternoon, sunlight streamed through the curtains as the family gathered for dinner. The table was a patchwork of memories. Mismatched chairs, the same chipped plates they'd used since childhood. Kiara had cooked her first full meal, Harper had brought flowers, and Zoe had news. Her book, Love Without Borders, was being published worldwide. Daniel smiled as she spoke, though his voice came softer now. "You did what I never could. You gave our story wings." The conversation drifted to laughter and stories, of spilled spaghetti, of braiding disasters, of the day they'd painted the porch pink because it felt happy. Outside, children from the neighborhood played tag, their shouts echoing through the street where once people had stared with suspicion. Times had changed because love had dared to plant roots here. As evening settled, Daniel sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. Tiana placed baby Elena Grace in his lap. The tiny girl reached up, gripping his finger. "You've got your mama's fire," he whispered to her, his voice trembling. "And her heart." The sky burned orange as the sun sank low, and for a moment, everything was still. The laughter inside, the scent of roasted corn, the hum of a world that had learned to be gentle again. That night, Daniel wrote one final letter. His hands shook, but his words flowed steady. "My girls, you were never my charity. You were my miracle. Each of you taught me something different: courage, grace, patience, and the beauty of belonging. The world will still have hate, but you've shown it can be outloved. Keep choosing kindness even when it's hard. Keep building bridges even when others build walls. And when you feel lost, remember this house, this porch, this love. It's yours forever. Dad." He folded the note and slipped it into Zoe's manuscript. Then he lay back, breathing in the scent of rain on the wind, and smiled. Days later, the family gathered again. This time under the soft glow of candles at Grace Baptist Church. The pews overflowed with people from every background, all touched by the man who had once simply wanted to keep 6 sisters together. Reverend Milton spoke gently, his voice thick with emotion. Daniel Cooper showed us that love isn't a color, a title, or a bloodline. It's a daily choice, a sacrifice that heals the world one act at a time. When the choir began to sing, Kiara couldn't hold back her tears. Tiana wrapped an arm around her. "He's still here," she whispered. "Everywhere we look." Months passed. Zoe's book became a bestseller, sparking conversations across the country about family, empathy, and racial unity. Amari expanded the foundation's reach to neighboring states. Layla worked with lawmakers to reform adoption systems. Harper's murals, bright and bold, appeared in cities from New Orleans to Chicago, each signed with 3 small words: "For Dad, always." And on a quiet morning years later, Kiara stood on the porch with little Elena Grace at her side. The house had been repainted, but the same wind still moved through the trees. "This is where it all began," she told her niece. Elena looked up, her eyes wide. "Did he really love you all that much?" Kiara smiled softly. "More than enough for a lifetime." As they stepped inside, sunlight poured through the doorway, illuminating the family photo that hung by the stairs. Daniel in the middle, 6 smiling daughters around him, and a quote engraved beneath. "Family isn't what you're born into. It's what you choose to love into existence." The world outside went on bustling, imperfect, ever-changing. But in that home on Elm Street, the legacy of one man's love continued to ripple outward, touching lives he would never meet. Because love, once chosen, never truly ends. It simply finds new hearts to live in.